So it is just gone 2 p.m. British Summer Time in Oxford, and I'm very pleased to be welcoming people from around the world to the 360th of our CGHE webinar series. I'm David Mills. I'm Deputy Director at the Centre for Global Higher Education, and it's a great privilege today to be welcoming Mei Li and Wen Xu from East China Normal University, who are going to be talking about being and becoming academics, cases of overseas returnees career pathways in China. Now, this is the 9th in our webinar series of academic mobility. It's a really important topic for all of us in global higher education, both student and faculty mobility, and they've got 2 contrasting case studies they're going to give us about returnees. So I'm really looking forward to this. Before I start, the usual quick housekeeping notes to remind you. We're recording this and we'll post this Zoom webinar to our website and to YouTube as soon as we can. And there'll also be a transcript of the chat function and a Spotify audio feed. Please keep yourself muted. You can turn on your video at the point in which we have questions and answers. So you don't have to have the video on during the webinar, but when you do ask questions in the chat, I will ask you at the end to come forward, turn your video on, and you can ask your question to the speakers. And I think you probably know the rest of it. And so I'll leave it there at that, and I'll hand over now back to our presenters, who are going to take us forward. Mei Li, Wen Xu, the screen's all yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your nice introduction. Good afternoon for friends from UK, and good evening for friends from China. It's our great honor to share with you about our case study on the career development of the Chinese overseas returnees. So just a moment. So now is 9 in the evening in Shanghai. So our presentation will cover 4 parts. I will illustrate the background and the research question, method, and also I will talk about the case of the Southern Youth Talent Program scholar, and then Dr. Xu Wen will share with us about his own experience of career development in China, and then draw a conclusion. So followed by the question and comment. So we actually focus on 2 contrasting cases. One is Southern Youth Talent Program scholar in natural science. The other is overseas returnees in social science. We aim to explore the different experience and the early career development of Chinese returnees. So actually, we all know that there are much research about the transnational academic mobility, and also a large number of research focused on Chinese academic mobility in global mobility, but actually much adopt the perspective from the political and economic perspective. We will shift to the academic and cultural perspective. And much research actually focus on the micro level of policy and trends, and also adopt the nation state as an analytical unit. We will focus on the meso level and the macro level, and also much research actually adopt a quantitative research method. We will adopt a qualitative research method. So before I start to talking about the case, actually, I would like to briefly introduce about the background of Chinese talent policy, because for those who are not so familiar with the Chinese policy, so I will particularly focus on the Southern Youth Talent Program scholars program. So for decades, actually, a large number of Chinese students and scholars have studied in the advanced countries and stay in the host countries on graduation. So China had lost the best and brightest minds to the industrial countries. The 21st century has witnessed the shifting of brain drain to brain gain and brain circulation. Actually, the Chinese government has been strategically initiated many policies to bring back the overseas Chinese talent to come back home to strengthen the science, technology, and higher education. One of the major initiatives is the Southern Youth Talent Program, launched in 2011. But according to research of Cao Chong, actually the top scientists still prefer to stay in the host country. So how about the effects of the Southern Youth Talent Program? So we're talking about that in a minute. So actually, you can see from this table, the number of Southern Youth Talent Program scholars increased from 2011 to 2008. Actually, the 9 round, from the first round, actually is only 143 recruited, and the 9th round actually have more than 600 recruited in this program, and in total, actually they have 3,535 young elite scientists recruited. So you may be curious about who are qualified to be the candidate of this Southern Youth Talent Program candidate. So they have this kind of criteria or requirement qualifications. The candidate should be under the age of 40 and should be the best scientific elite and specialized in natural science and engineering technology. Obtain a doctorate degree, have less than 3 years of overseas research, have no less than more than 3 years overseas research experience, and hold a formal teaching research title in foreign university or organization, and should work in China as a full-time faculty member. So in order to attract the elite scientists come back, they have the preferential policies, including the research grant, very competitive salary package, and also the higher academic title. Most of them are appointed as a full professor. You know, actually for most of the scholars, it will take decades for them to be promoted step by step from assistant professor to associate professor to full professor. But for this group, at very young age, on return to China, they are promoted as the full professor directly, and they also have policy to support the research lab building and research team forming. So, and also house subsidies and family settlement policy. So for the social science scholars, we also have some policies such as the super postdoc research program, the postdoctoral international exchange program, the Changjiang Scholar Program, and the Youth Scholar of Changjiang Scholar Program. But in general, there are few policy and less financial support for overseas returnees in humanities and social science. So based on this background, we start the following questions for our case study. First, how do overseas returnees translate transnational capital and mobilize resources to construct their professional development space and navigate their career trajectory? What are the patterns of their academic career development in China? How do the overseas returnees' academic pathway and experience differ STEMs disciplines to those of humanities and social science. How does the academic career development of overseas returnees of Southern Youth Talent Program distinct from that of less facilitated overseas returnees? So we adopted the mixed method for the project we conduct for the on the academic returnees career development. We conduct the CV analysis and the semi-structure interview. So all the participants come from the 4985 project university in Shanghai and one first-class discipline university in Jiangsu province. So most of so we will focus on the two cases. You can see from this contrast, these are two very contrast cases. They are differed by gender, by age, by discipline, by academic title, by institution, by the year the staying in foreign country, and by the year the returning to China, and by the identity. So in order to investigate the two cases, we construct this conceptual framework. We will analyze the two cases from three perspectives. First is from the norm of academic circle in China. So the norm of universalism and particularism, how these two different norms influence the career development, and also the disciplinary culture may differ between natural science and the social science, how this different kind of discipline culture influence the career development. And third, so how they construct the career in transnational space and the domestic space, and how they mobilize resources from both the transnational community and the domestic community. So you may get the idea about our conceptual framework from this slide. So in terms of the norm of universalism and particularism, so then norm of universalism refers to the idea that scientists or scholars should be rewarded based on the contribution to the knowledge. The norm of particularism refers to the idea that the allocation of rewards and resources consider scholars' characteristics independently from their scientific contributions. So how the two cases deal with or take advantage of norm of particularism and the universalism in China? They have to face some challenges and difficulties. For example, they have to decide whether to be more involved in non-academic affairs, to take the administrative position with the career development. And they have to consider about how they can accumulate the publication. So in China, so they have very high pressure for them to publish and publish and publish. So they have to make a decision whether they should publish in Chinese or in English. Particularly for social science overseas returnees, they have to make a decision, because if they only publish in English, they cannot build that reputation in China. But if they only publish in Chinese, they will lose their advantage for mobility and future mobility. So, the natural science and the social science also, the academic life into these two are very different, just according to Burton Clark's saying. So actually the two words are divided for social science and natural science. They have fundamental difference between the hard and soft, pure and applied field for academic life. Also, for the natural science and humanity and social science, the default in terms of knowledge production and reputation building. These figures just show very directly about the for natural science. Actually, the international academic community and the domestic academic community overlapped. Most of them overlapped, and the knowledge production are very common. So in the commons, they have to follow the common regulation code, and the publication mostly in international language, in English, or and for humanity and social science, actually the international community and the domestic community actually are not less overlapped, more parallelized. So now I return to the case. So this case is a special case even among the Southern Youth Talent Program scholars, because he is very successful. So we'll find out why his career is so successful. So he was born in an intellectual family. His father is a university professor, and he has a very elite educational background. We have a bachelor degree from a CGHE university in China. CGHE is the top university in China for bachelor degree, and on graduation, he directly go to UK, pursue his PhD, and then come back to China to conduct the postdoc research, and then a second postdoc in UK. So it takes him 9 years for preparing his academic career. And also, you maybe wonder why he decided to conduct the second postdoc in UK. He told me in the interview that it's because the qualification for Southern Youth Talent Program requires overseas working experience. And when he completed his PhD in UK, he decided to come back. He contacted a professor, a top professor scientist in China in a CGHE university in China, and become a postdoc. So on return China, he had to construct his professional development space, including the research lab, research team, and get the research grant. So the research lab are very good. Actually have 2 rooms, 70 square meter plus student office. He's very satisfied with his lab and work condition. You know, some other colleagues or Southern Youth Talent Program scholars, actually this lab is only 30 square meters. And in terms of the research team, is middle size. You can see they include Dr. Wang and Dr. Wang's supervisor, the postdoc supervisor, and 3 postdoctoral fellows, and 2 PhD students, and 8 master students, and 12 undergraduate students. So total, the team have 32 members. By contrast, you may know that for the social science young scholars, the team are very small in size. For some, even they can only work individually. They have very few students as a team member. So once research grant, also he is very successful acquired research grant from a variety of sources, such as the Natural Science Foundation China, then Ministry of Education of Science and Technology, and the provincial state governments and university. So actually, his academic performance is very good. So established a new research direction and a field. He's at the cutting edge level in his field. And also his focus is very new in China and is in interdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary field. And his publication productivity are also very excellent in terms of quality and quantity. He has published more than 200 papers by a short period, just and also with team members, colleagues at home and abroad, and former supervisor. So I may argue that there are three very significant factors impact his career development. The first is significant others. For his bachelor, PhD, and 2 postdoc supervisors are all prestigious scientists. And also the second factor are institutional reputation, both elite university in China and UK. The third one is the professional policy. And also the identity of being the title of the Southern Youth Talent Program scholar. All this have led to his quick academic promotion, rapid career development, reputation, and all the resources and the government support, university support. The role played by his supervisor is very important, including the career planning, the job opportunity, and all other resources and the leadership. So he said that his supervisor actually is the significant others. So another important mechanism for his successful growing up is that in this university they have this kind of models, master plus team members model for discipline development. The master this model actually initiated in 1990s after Dr. Wang returned to China in 2017. He entered this university where he joined his postdoctoral supervisor's team. His former supervisor is academician, who is also in charge of the lab, as he cannot be in the university full time. Dr. Wang helped his supervisor lead the scientific research team. So it's very important mechanism for his faster grow up. The influence now of university then on his career is publication, contribution to knowledge, contribution to the social economic development. So he's very successful and an outstanding performance in both the transnational and domestic academic community. You can see actually in China and also internationally, very high achievement. So I will summarize that the characteristic of Dr. Wang's professional development owing to his transnational capital, including the human capital, social capital, identity, he enjoyed privilege and advantage in terms of professional promotion, research team, research funding, and the lab space construction. He transfers his transnational capital to upgrade career trajectory and make contribution to institutional discipline development. So finally, I will use a figure to summarize the pattern of the Southern Youth Talent Program scholars' academic career development. On the left, actually, investment from the individual, family, government, and institution, and then they have accumulated the transnational capital by the education, and then they will have enjoyed the status of being the Southern Youth Talent Program. They on returning home, they construct the professional development space and have professional practice. So they have two kinds of different mode for the transnational capital transfer. One is very smooth. The second one is blocked transnational capital transfer. So for the very smooth, they may have very rapid career development and steadily upward career development. For the blocked transnational capital transfer, they may have slow career development. So that's my presentation, I would like to hand over to Dr. Xu. Dr. Xu will share with you about his own experience on the career development. So I will just yeah.
Okay, thank you, Professor Lee. Thank you for your talk about early career researchers in the discipline of nature science. And for me, I'd like to present myself as a contrasting case to talk about early career researchers and my own career pathway in the discipline of social science, which is quite different from the case presented by Professor Lee. So yeah, at the moment, I'm a postdoctoral researcher at ECNU, which is a very prestigious university in China, especially in the discipline of education. And I obtained my doctoral degree in Australia and returned to China in 2020, which was 3 years ago. And up to now, I have published some articles after graduation, and I will explain it later why I have to write and publish so frantically. At first, I'd like to introduce some Chinese concepts which might be new to some of you. And here I listed 2 buzzwords that are popular in contemporary Chinese society and academia. The first is 内卷. It reflects the younger generation, our frustration of being locked into competition that we know it is meaningless, but we still need to work very hard. And actually, the competition for employment opportunities as well as permanent positions in academia is very stiff at the moment. And we know no matter whatever we do, we may not get what we want, but we still need to work very, very hard. And another word is the up or leave policy. As China endeavors to become the first in the global higher education field, like I think in 10 years ago, it reformed its personnel management system and replaced it with an American model. And ECRs have to do a lot to get the tenured position. And in the disciplines of social science, grants, publications, and networking are fundamental to promotion as well as other job seeking, other job opportunities, and the projects approved by National Social Science Fund is extremely important. And I can say this is a threshold for promotion or job seeking. And the projects approved and financially supported by National Social Science Fund is just like ECRS projects in the UK and ARC projects in Australia. The opportunities are real, and the process of grant application is very, very competitive and tough. In comparison to the participant, to Dr. Wang in Professor Lee's research study, to be honest, I didn't have such powerful academic networks, and actually, I was not that lucky in the job market. But instead of using some very pessimistic adjectives such as vulnerable, precarious, or outsider to describe myself, I'd rather define myself as a grassroots academic, a grassroots ECR, early career researcher, as a grassroots identity. Empowers me to negotiate, to challenge, and to resist the contemporary research order from below. And at the moment, I have 3 projects approved by China Postdoctoral Science Foundation and the Ministry of Education. And I also have a monograph and some journal articles published in the past 3 years since 2020, since I graduated, since my graduation. And I consider these international publications as highly valued international capital, which could be converted into some other domestic capital in Chinese academia. And since I returned to China 3 years ago, my collaboration networks also shifted a bit as I have more colleagues in China, and also because I was able to exchange my international academic capital for social capital in China. And previously, before doing my postdoc, I felt it was so hard to get a job done, and I feel it was very hard to get a position in prestigious institutions. But now it becomes a bit easier. Yeah, so what I want to say is that while some ECRs receive their early tenure and flourish in academia, most ECRs, I can say, we do live in cruel optimism. And something we desire is actually an obstacle to our flourishing. And also, while China is duplicating an American-style tenure track system, ECRs in China, especially in the disciplines of social science, from my perspective, we are not adequately supported as our peers in the US. So I do hope that Chinese universities, our universities, could reflect on it and start to develop a personnel management system of our own so as to flourish in the global higher education arena. Well, to quickly recap, our research studies found that heterogeneity exists across disciplines, across fields and researchers, and while some very exceptional ECRs in the disciplines of nature science are more oriented to particularism, most returnees would have to rely on research outputs, would have to rely on knowledge production to develop their early careers. But I can say both of us mobilize our international academic capital to carve out, to create a space for professional development. So these are some references of our today's presentation. And I think it's all for today. And I hope you found our research interesting, and we'd love to hear your questions and comments. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's great. Thank you for wow, two really interesting presentations with lots of content and contrasting perspectives. Weren't you? You were very honest about your own journey, and your comment about frantic publishing was I'm sure will resonate with many people in the audience. And you've published 19 articles already, which is really good going. It's interesting you see yourself as a grassroots academic in that context, where you are sort of already doing amazingly well. And then Mei-Li, your overview, Mei-Li, of the 1,000 talents was really interesting, and there's lots we could ask about how that gets reported, but also the sort of the incentives it provides, and as you spell out very well, the resources that it gives the most successful talents. So really interesting presentation, and there will be some questions I'm sure coming in, but I'm going to start, and I'm going to ask you about you both use this universalism particularism distinction, and I thought, Mei-Li, your comments about the sort of the less overlap between international and domestic publications was very interesting, and I'd like you to say a bit more about that. because I think that was what you were saying there, was that for social scientists, publishing in Chinese provided capital, intellectual capital within China. And yet that therefore meant you had less international capital. I think that's what you were saying. So but perhaps you could say a little bit more about that, but also a structural question for you both is, should we be judging the social sciences by the productivity, by the standards, by the size of the natural sciences? You know, social sciences haven't traditionally, I mean, occasionally in some fields they have, but mostly they haven't been big teams with big labs. Often they've been small groups or individual researchers. So is it fair to compare the two according to the size of their lab or the size of their publications? Because if you have got 10 postdocs, of course you're producing 10 times as many papers. So I guess my question really for you both would be to come and reflect a bit on the structural position of the social sciences in China, the amount of funding that goes to it, which you've explored mainly, and whether and how that makes social scientists in China feel about the way they're valued, and whether they should be judged in a different way, and whether really for you, Wenxu, whether you should be judging yourself so negatively. And I mean, I thought grassroots was a lovely way of putting it, but is it also a comment on your disciplinary field? So there, you start, and then I'll get some more questions in.
Thank you very much, David, for your fantastic questions. I will try to respond to your question. The first is about the less overlap for social science of international domestic community. In that sense, I think actually it's very obviously they have two communities: academic community, international community, and domestic community. So for every scholars in social science, they have to think about whether they prefer or whether how to balance the knowledge production or the professional practice in which community, how they balance or how they prefer. So for some scholars, they may be very international. They actually published a lot of articles in international journals. For the most of scholars in social science, actually they publish in Chinese or in the native language, but they have also to struggle because actually if they only publish in the domestic the native language, there are no one international know them, so they will lose the reputation internationally. So they have to balance even for social science. But for the natural social science, actually most of the issues and the theory are very much cultural and the cultural and historical related. So it's very much related to the own society's development. So they feel very, many kind of tension for their career, particularly for the research, how they to balance these two different knowledge production in internationally and domestically. So I think the second one is about should the social science follow the career to judge them by the natural science? I definitely no. But they have also have to. Actually, they are very different. I mentioned about, but they in terms of knowledge production, actually they have some kind of standard actually. So they're very different in terms of the process or knowledge production and different. Some are very large team and they have experimental process. Some are mostly on theory or on empirical study in the field work. So, but actually, they have some similarity as well. They have some similarity. We cannot judge the performance by publication, the number of publication, the quantity of publication, but by the quality of the publication and the contribution to the knowledge and to the socio-economic development. I think is most important. And I think you are right. It's unfair if we judge the social science by the how many they published, how large is the team, research team. Why I emphasize is because I think for the government, for the policy, mainly focus on the STEM, the social science, natural science. They ignore, they do not pay much attention to the humanity and the social science. That's the point I would like to argue. So just quickly respond to your
Thank you, thank you. And when do you want to come in and add to that? You've also responded to this question around publishing in Web of Science journals. Perhaps you want to explain that as well.
But I want to explain something first. Just now, Professor Lee said it is not fair to compare our research outputs to those researchers in the field of social nature science. But I think it's quite a fair way, because if we are not evaluated by research outputs, I mean, in terms of our quantity and quality, use very specific numbers or like index, I think networking will be foregrounded, and that would be very, very unfair for most ECRs, especially for overseas returnees. Yeah.
So could you explain that? Do you mean that you think it is the right thing to do to count volume? Yes, because if you didn't, then it would be around who you know and favoritism. I see.
Yeah, yeah. Because otherwise I will be disadvantaged.
So could you, before I go back to the other questions, could you explain your comment in response to the journals being indexed? Is the point that the journals that are in Scopus are not Chinese language journals, and therefore they're not recognized in China? Would a solution be for more Chinese language journals to be indexed in Scopus? Or
yeah. Chinese higher education institutions only value some certain journals published in social science index journals, SSCI journals, but not Scopus journals. So different database. Yeah.
So just to explain those for those who don't know, Scopus is a more inclusive. SCI and SSCIR is more selective. Yes, I understand. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you. So let's go back to some of the other questions that have come in. David Zweig, you asked, so Mei Li and Wen-Shu used this term cruel optimism by Laurent Ballant, which is a very interesting term. You sort of, you hope you're going to you invest in the future, even though you know it might not, it might often be cruel to you. Do you want to ask that question, David?
Trying to unmute. Okay, unmute. Hi. Yeah, well, I mean, the question's pretty obvious. Hi, Mei Li. Why? I mean, the question has two. If you have this sense of sort of how difficult it's going to be, right? So my question is, why go back? If you had found a good job in Australia, if you had been able to land a good job in Australia, given your sense of difficulty, and I think also, we're sort of skirting around the issue of the difficult climate, I would say, in China right now. For research and writing, why go back? Why not avoid it?
To be honest, I think Australia is a hell for academic jobs. It's very tough to find a job in Australian universities, because I'm a social science researcher. This is my first reason. And another reason is that I returned to China just a few days, like 2 or 3 days before the pandemic And because of the lockdowns, I was not able to return to Australia. And yeah, and also I have my family in China, so I don't want to leave them. So multiple reasons contributed to my choice. Yeah.
Thanks.
No worries.
Good. Okay. That's a great question. Thank you, David. Let's go on. We can come back to these things. Xiaohao Jiang, do you like to ask a question about appointments of academics?
Hi. Yeah, you know, personally, I know Professor Li Mei very well. Yeah, I'm her student. I once conducted research on comparing the Chinese universities' policies for recruiting overseas returnees and the Korean policies, and I found a very difference is that the Korean policy actually they don't recruit the young academics directly as full professors, but in China there are a lot of universities doing this as a way or mean to attract into those returnees. So I'm in that paper I argue that actually this is not very fair to both the domestic students and the graduates, you know, PhD graduates, and also the returnees themselves, because they have to, you know, they actually lose the process of growing from assistant professor to associate and to full. So I'm wondering about you know, Professor Li's opinion on this. Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, what's your question? I just
So I think the question, I mean, is just to rephrase it, is the Chinese policy of appointing people straight to full professor,
Yeah.
not just to associate professor, and then up.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
is it fair to the domestic, you know, the PhD graduates and also to themselves?
I think it's not fair. That's why we will argue that actually to appoint it freshly graduated PhD as a full professor is not fair. Because actually, according to my interview, actually some are very young. I mean, in the 30s, just they have to transfer from postdoc to a faculty member, and they have to play the role as the lead of the lab and the lead of the discipline. It's very hard for them, so it takes time for them to grow up. If you directly appointed them as a full professor, of course they will grow up very fast, but they cannot accumulate experience. And on the other hand, actually it's not fair for most of other colleagues have worked for decades. They work very hard, make all effort to be promoted very slowly. Actually, they also have made contributions to the institutional development, to knowledge, but actually they cannot get such very quick promotion. Some take very long time for them to be promoted. So I think it's not fair, and so it should be give them research resources, but not to give them the full professor directly. Yeah.
Can I check?
Okay, thank you.
If you don't produce as a young talent, do you lose your title?
What?
If you're not productive, if you don't publish lots of papers, can they take away the funding from you?
Yes. I think sometimes this kind of title is for a term, for about 5 years or 4 years. If you do not perform very well, you didn't have very productive, so they will stop the substantial support for you. But for most of them, actually, they are successful. because they get very good funding and very good team.
Of course,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Thank you. Does that answer your question, Xiaohu?
Yes. Thank you very much.
Great. Let's go on. Anand Chen, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, hi, thank you. Nice to meet you, Professor Li and Dr. Shi here. Yeah, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I think it gives me lots of information regarding the career path of early young stage scholars and doctors. So I'm just wondering, like, what can we as ordinary Chinese young scholars or doctors learn from the great success of the first case? Since apparently I think he has super strong networks and he has many privileges. And so I'm just wondering, like, what is the role of his success in representing the thousand youth career path? And yeah, so apart from getting published and apart from all these endeavors to like academic contribution in our field, so what can we learn from this kind of successful career path? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. I think that Dr. Wang's case is very special. It's not a typical case, even among the Southern Youth Talent Program scholars, because you can see actually he very good family background and very strong education background in China and in UK, and also because his supervisor are the top scientists, so with his supervisors support, so he grew up, he get all the resources and get all the performance very well. I think on one hand, you can as a young PhD holder can learn is actually in any kind of a community, you have to strengthen your social network and mobilize your transnational capital, both the knowledge, skill, and all this social network. So to take full advantage of all this network and to cooperate with the colleagues, your supervisor, and to lay the foundation for your career. I think, but I think Dr. Xu's case is also very inspiring because he's ordinary PhD holder, but through publication, and work very hard, also have well established his career in the early stage. Yeah.
Thank you. Some like very, very admirable publications. Thank you.
Great. Yes, you're not just a grassroots academic, Wenshu, you're a grassroots entrepreneur, I would say. Yes. Shall we go on to Anding Shi as a question? Anding, hi, how are you? Anding's my student, I should admit.
Hello. Thank you, Professor Li and Dr. Xu's presentation. And I'm very interested about the academic life of social science researchers, especially when they're transitioning from especially when they're having some overseas studying experience and then returning to China. So my question is like for Dr. Xu, is after like having experience of studying in Australia and also working in China as a faculty researcher, and have you perceived any difference in the publishing or academic, the research culture in these two countries? And has your way of doing research and your perception towards doing research changed during this transition process, and including your own academic identity? And I want to hear more about your stories on this transitioning process. Thank you.
I saw your questions in the previously. I think the publishing culture is almost the same in the UK, in Australia, and in China, because we have to publish a lot to get promoted, to get our tenured position. And in terms of differences in terms of undertaking research. And in China, it seems that, correct me if I am wrong, Professor Li, I feel that in Chinese higher education institutions, especially in faculty of education, it seems that people are more inclined to undertake quantitative research. Don't you think so, Professor Li?
Sorry, I'm reading the message.
No worries, but yeah, but my feeling is that it seems that people in China, they think quantitative research is a valued, is a valid scientific research method, but for quantitative method, they think it's less valid. And I try to alter my research method, but it's very hard. So I just stick to my way of doing research. And I think qualitative method has its value. And also in terms of identity, my research identity, I don't think I change a lot because I have passion, I have enthusiasm for research. So I just do whatever I want to do. Yeah. So that's my answer. Thank you.
That's great, Wenshu. And definitely stick to your strengths and to qualitative research. I think qualitative research is often more time consuming. I think it often takes longer. And that's another thing we're not looking at, which is the sort of different cultures and disciplines and the times that different journals take to read, such that it's much faster to publish in some journals, especially in science journals, than in social science journals. And then within social sciences, it's often the most qualitative ones that are the slowest to publish. So you have all these other factors that I think need to be taken into account before you judge yourself badly. So now there's a little time for just two more questions. Jared John Seka has asked about indexing and the credit you get. Do you want to come and ask a question, Jared? We might have lost Jared, but his question was about grants, funds for how are funds funding for social sciences and he was reflecting in India. So perhaps Wenshu, you might want to comment on that. But let's also bring in Adam Poole, who just came in right at the end with a quick question about what counts as an early career academic. Adam, are you here?
Yeah, sorry. Actually, I co-authored the paper with one. So
great, welcome.
So something that struck me is that it's obviously called it's for youth or young scholars. And then what struck me is that obviously, if you start your PhD journey later in life, then you might technically be an early career researcher, but you would be ineligible to take part in that kind of program. And obviously that's very inequitable and there's some discrimination there. And I just wondered, because I'm also an older early career academic. So I've just, I'm starting out and I'm actually in my early 40s now. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts were about that. And if you'd ever considered that, so you talked a lot about sort of the capitals that people, accrue, but what about some of the discrimination that might be there?
That's a really great question, Adam, and I think the academy has a real issue with ageism, more generally. I think so. Yes, that's a great question. Wenshu, why don't you have a go at answering that?
I think age discrimination does exist in Chinese higher education, and if you are older than 35 years old, you will miss a lot of opportunities, both in terms of applying for some titles as well as and a grant application. Yeah, so this is age discrimination, I think.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the only thing I'd say, Adam, here is that actually sometimes coming in with lots of life experience and or as a part-time doctoral student can be a great way of bringing your experience to bear on your research. So it can mean that you can have a very successful research career, but you're right, I think in general, until recently, the academy has been very focused on a certain model of an academic career that really needs to be challenged. I think we're running out of time. We've got 1 minute left. So I'm probably going to wrap up now. and thank Mei Li and Wenshu for a really, really excellent combination of presentations. It was lovely to have your personal reflections, Wenshu, and Mei Li, your framing was great. So I hope that adds to our knowledge of faculty mobility and the challenges and potentials of return, especially to somewhere as resourced as China. Our next webinar, which is on Thursday, is on another theme around internationalization of higher education. It's called Trends in Internationalization in a Time of Geopolitical Turmoil. So please register, come back and join us again next 2 days' time. And in the meantime, can we all have a virtual round of applause for a lovely presentation, and thank you again for your presentations. Good to see you. Thank you all for coming. Come and join us.
Yeah, chair this webinar, and thank all the professor colleagues' questions, and thank you, Dr. Xu, for your cooperation. Yeah, it's our great honor to have this webinar to participate. We're looking forward to the future dialogue and discussion on this webinar.
Likewise. So see you again soon. Come back and join us. Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.